Just before we move on to the final part, and we're very lucky to have the Housing Ombudsman with us today, Richard Blakeway. Does anyone own a white Volvo GN6800E? Yes? Apparently, Tim, you're blocking someone in, so do you mind just moving your motor? Thank you. Okay, as we've spoken about, so we're on to the final stretch now, just ahead of lunch, and we're very fortunate to have Richard with us today, as I think Nigel spoke about, but also the team, and you've heard the theme through the session that we've got. There are changes to the regulations and what we're doing, oversight, complaints, involvement, engagement, using inquiries effectively, proactively, to actually work and engage with our residents is absolutely key to where we are. So we're really lucky to have Richard with us today to give us a bit of oversight with regards to where we are, the priorities, what's happening next, and then field some questions with us. So if you can show your appreciation for Richard as he comes up. Thank you, Richard.
Oh, cool. Thanks so much. Good morning, folks. Good afternoon. Sorry, it's 21 minutes past 12. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, I think after me, there's the Housing Awards. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Do you want to do it at 12:30?
We're okay. There's a little bit of scope I've got towards it.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll be mindful. You don't want me talking and to miss out on lunch and all the rest of it. So I'll try and keep it brief. Do you want me to take questions afterwards as well?
If you could, I'll literally
cool.
in 5 minutes. Yeah, so we still have to do it left.
All right. Okay. Right. Now we've established the ground rules. Let me get going. Look, my name's Rick Blakeway. I'm the Housing Ombudsman, and I've been at the Ombudsman service for about 5 years now. And what I can tell you is, when I first started the job, people kind of avoid me in the room. I hope it wasn't me, but I think it was the role, and because instinctively human response to complaints is, oh no. For the person making the complaint, there can be trepidation. It can be quite an emotional thing. There can be worry. Look, I'll make this complaint. Am I going to be seen as a troublemaker? What's it going to mean for my relationship with the body, the landlord in this case, that if I make that complaint? And for the people receiving the complaints, for the landlord, there can be that knee-jerk response of, well, did we do anything wrong here? Or, we must be at fault. The assumption we must be at fault if there's a complaint. But, hey, bit of defensiveness can come through. So whenever I went to events or spoke to people, there'd be a little bit of worry. And, it was crystallized by the person saying, I hope we don't meet again. Don't mean to be offensive, but I hope we don't meet again. Because obviously if the Ombudsman's there, the assumption is we're on the naughty step. We've done something wrong. Now, being here, therefore, and a big thank you for inviting me here, shows that I'm not here because Luton's on the naughty step. I'm here because of all of the work that I've just been listening to and all the work that you've heard about in relation to engaging with customers, engaging with residents, improving services, and meeting the challenges out there. Because it's tough. It's probably never been tougher to work in social housing, and it's pretty tough if you're a resident as well. Homes are getting older, costs are going up, and there can also just be a divergence of experiences. There'll be lots of residents who will find that they can get stuff at a click of a button and all the rest of it, and but then the reality is that housing management, housing services, it takes a lot. That's a big super tanker. So it takes a lot to kind of deliver what you might experience elsewhere. So that can lead to frustrations and challenges. So it's pretty tough out there. And during a tough period, there can, and historically perhaps has been, a temptation to say, we've got to focus on the front line. We've got to put resources in where they'll make the most difference. And something like complaints can kind of risk getting pushed to the side a bit. Look, we just got to do stuff well and get stuff done. And complaints are almost secondary. And I'm not saying that's the mindset here, and that's certainly not the mindset that you've heard here. But I think historically, not just in housing but elsewhere, that probably has sometimes been the mindset. But what I know, And what I think you're seeing is that complaints are actually not the thing to push to the margins, to push to the parameters, but they can be integral for navigating you through those choppy waters and those difficult times. And there's been two moments in the few years that I've been doing this role where where the power of complaints really came across to me as something far more than more than an individual case treated in isolation, but actually that individual case being part of a jigsaw puzzle that tells a big picture. It forms part of a big picture. And the first was meeting with survivors at Grenfell, and the second was on a Friday morning in Rochdale, listening to Awab Ishaq's parents giving evidence about their son's death before I gave evidence about issues relating to damp and mould. And both of those things really had a big impact on me personally, but I think also showed me that complaints are part of a big landscape here. So for the survivors of Grenfell, and you'll obviously have seen that, followed that, read lots and heard lots about it, there's really strong sentiment amongst the survivors and some of the bereaved families that I've spoken to as well, that they were raising complaints and those complaints were being fobbed off. And whilst those complaints obviously didn't go to the depth, inconceivable that they go to the depth of the issues that have been revealed at Grenfell around components and testing regimes and so on, what they spoke to was kind of attitudes, respect, culture, and this sense that they just weren't being taken seriously. And the issues they were worried about, the quality of work being done, the way the work was being conducted, the questions they were asking about what's happening here, were just not treated seriously. And that is an indicator, a canary in the coal mine, if you like, that something wasn't quite right. And for our Ishaq, the 2-year-old boy who died in Rochdale because following the coroner's decision, prolonged exposure to damp and mould, was just not knowing how to raise the issues, how to make a complaint, how to exercise their rights, how to get someone to listen to their worries. And that came across very, very strongly as well. And whilst both of those examples that I've given are profound consequences that happened there, and obviously that hopefully will only ever happen in a small number of circumstances, the characteristics of them are things that you've heard about this morning that will be familiar. How do I raise a complaint? Am I being taken seriously? Will it be put right? What will change? So a couple of quick thoughts, and then I'll take questions, and then you'll have the awards. But a couple of quick thoughts on this. Three. So the first is just getting the basics right, the foundations right. And that's why all the work that you've heard about on embedding the complaint handling code that the Ombudsman published a few years ago and is now a statutory code is so important. Because out there was a postcode lottery in terms of the way complaints were made. Different definitions of complaints, different timescales. I remember when we were developing the code, some landlords had a single stage process. Well, that's got its problems because obviously if you don't like the response, then that's kind of it. And then you've got to, escalate it. So it's kind of not really delivering any kind of natural justice at all. And other landlords had 16-stage processes. So you'd probably never find you reach the end of the complaints process. But it was so much more than some of the stuff is really important. It is important in terms of timescales because people will endlessly say, when will I get a response? What's going to happen by when? So clarity on all of that, ending a postcode lottery around it, is really, really important. And so I commend the work that's happened here to get that right. But complaints are more than transactions. And that leads to my second point, which is around the idea of the idea that complaints are kind of learning tools. And we've touched on that a bit, and you've heard some really good examples here of how learning from complaints have been put into practice. And what I'd say is that when you look at complaints, sometimes they can also prompt a fundamental rethink of how you do something, or what customers should expect, or what is the way to deliver services today. And there are some areas where I think that's really very true. And so damp and mold is obviously an area which has been really looked at. It's probably now the kind of best example, if you like, of landlords, including Luton, thinking about how do we approach damp and mold. Because for decades, the approach was largely around mold washes, open the windows, put the heating on. You know, that was kind of the very much the kind of accepted practice, accepted response out there. It wasn't always the response, and it doesn't mean that a mold wash isn't important, but it's not the kind of proactive, urgent, root cause kind of approach that you really need in relation to what is ultimately a statutory hazard. There are other areas as well. Noise nuisance I'd highlight. How do you distinguish between noise transference in a building where actually it's not necessarily intentional noise and antisocial behaviour? Because if you treat noise transference as antisocial behaviour, you've already ended up in an adversarial position when actually it might not be the people but the building that is the underlying reason for noise. And then how you manage health issues and disabilities, I think, are also really, really important areas that we've highlighted, because too often in the cases that we see, people where a service should have adjusted, should have changed, whether it been delivered in a different way or a different time, because of a health consideration or a vulnerability or whatever the individual circumstances of the household is, that didn't always happen. And then my third one, and just finally, is that so often, and this can sound a little dry, but so often you can plug complaints into your classic things around processes, systems. You know, so often people working in housing will just not have at their fingertips the information that they need to make the right decisions because of inadequate systems or records. So whether it's processes, systems, policies, that's all lots. There's lots from complaints that can help with that. But complaints are also one thing which I think is so important, that ultimately is the glue that sticks all of this together, which is around culture. Because if you like, complaints are a real window into culture, because they reflect the everyday experience of residents trying to receive services and the everyday experience of staff delivering services. And they show you kind of behaviours and things that can go well and things that don't go well. And it's no surprise. You'll get there in time, don't worry. I'm nearly done. But it's no surprise that the compliments, what linked all of the compliments that were shown on the screen? People. Yeah, people weren't saying, I love your system or your website's great. They may say that as well. But the ones that were shown were the ones about people. And that's why complaints are such a strong indicator on people, where it's good, where it needs, where people need empowerment and support. And they're a really good glue in culture. Because I can tell you, every chief executive, they all talk about culture. I can teach people things. I can pay for new systems, hopefully, if I've got the resources. But culture is, you know, you can shape a culture, but ultimately it's about behaviours, values. And that's where I think complaints, again, can really support you in that. So yes, get the transactions right, but also think about the big picture and what they say about you as an organisation, what they say about the relationship that you have with your landlord and what you think of your landlord, and also and so important when it's such a challenging time in which to deliver services. Right, okay, I'm going to stop there. Thank you for listening. Any questions? chap over there.
Would it be possible, in your role, to try to start encouraging all the housing associations in the council to try new signing systems, so you can ownership with audited rates, high level playing fields to domestic economy, so people have different systems and you can't have the overall excellence.
Yeah, I think that's really compelling point. Now, can we do it? Can we do it, and is it our role? So I think, the complaint handling code is a kind of single code of practice. Now, you can do it in different ways, and you can obviously employ different systems to do it. So I think it will drive a degree of convergence, and there's probably more we could do to point out why that's beneficial and why that's important. I think there's other areas where, again, we can point out, actually, why is it so different? I mean, I'm particularly, an ombudsman's work inevitably spends a lot of time looking at policies. I'm just so struck that delivering the same basic service is conceived in so many different ways. And, given that, in Luton, you will have not just the council, but social land, housing association and all the rest of it. So literally neighbours in streets will find that, fixing a leak will be conceived in different ways by different social landlords. Well, why? What benefit does that bring? And then I definitely think there's an issue. Social housing, one of the trends that you'll see over the next few years is the consolidation. Because of the financial pressures and other reasons, you'll see fewer housing providers. But for the experience to date shows that when typically housing associations merge, they can operate for years off separate systems. Merger doesn't necessarily lead to those changes and system integration. So I think there's a really big debate about there. Whilst we can't prescribe what system providers should use, we can absolutely set out the case for convergence and simplification and all of that.
I've got a couple of questions just to build on what you're saying, which look really helpful and completely share your view of the learning part. I wondered if you had some examples of where you've seen really powerful learning, and in particular across services, because when you look at it from a health lens, you're thinking beyond single services dealing with some of the problems as well. So I just wondered if you could share some of your insight.
Yeah, that's so I think so we do see examples of where learning has been done really effectively, and we have something as an organisation called a Centre for Learning, where what we're trying to do is, and it's free to access. And we've got about 8,000 housing professionals, practitioners who are kind of signed up to it, and that does share examples. I think that a couple of thoughts in terms of where have I seen good practice. So I think the first thing is where landlords have looked at their statutory obligations and then thought about, but what's the experience of people living in our homes? So we're not just delivering the bare minimum, but we're trying to pragmatically deliver something. So whilst this isn't kind of cross-organisational learning, I think it is it is an area which is just an example, which is now actually quite a few years old, but it really sticks in my mind, where the residents, and this isn't a Luton case, it's a housing association in London, and the residents had experienced silverfish infestation. And maybe it sticks in my mind because it was so powerful, the sort of testimony, the narrative from the residents who were, there was 2 children I remember, and they'd open up their lunch boxes at school and there'd be silverfish in, or they'd have silverfish in their hair, and they'd get bullied at school, and it really stuck in my mind. And the landlord's policy on pest control excluded silverfish. And the landlord isn't required by the law to include silverfish, but clearly looked back at how many cases did they have on silverfish, the effect of silverfish, particularly in the block, they can infest very quickly, and the impact on individuals, the distress it causes. And they brought that in and they thought about practices and support that they could provide. And I thought that was empathetic, and I thought that was thoughtful, and that was joining dots up. I think on cross-organisational kind of cooperation, I think one of the challenges can be around where new homes have been built, the journey the resident goes on, the buyer goes on, from the sales team to the operational team. And I think that can be particularly true, for example, for shared ownership and shared owners, and how expectations can just be sometimes mismanaged because they believe one thing's going to happen and then another thing happens in reality. And I think trying to get much better handovers there and internal communication and then communication with the resident has been an area where I've seen some improvement. There's still a long way to go for lots of landlords, but I've certainly seen a recognition and some improvement about those handovers and communication areas.
I'm a tenant. I just want to ask you a quick question. I've seen a lot of recommendations made by your team, and I'm really grateful to your input. I just wanted to find out, basically, once you made, for example, recommendation to the council to make sure that the records are accurate, would you guys do follow up to see whether this recommendation is being put on place? And also, maybe this question might not be for you, would it be useful to have a view of your record, live view of your record, to see whether there's some, misrepresentation of some fact, so that you can address them without having the need to complain later on? Would that be useful to reckon? Do you have any other improvement to be made?
Cool. Okay, thank you. So on the first question, this is about, you said accommodation. You're not saying temporary accommodation. This is about records and yeah.
In general.
Yeah.
All tenants, whether they're in temporary accommodation or whether they're in council. Yeah.
Great. So firstly, kind of records and quality of records. And then the second part was around the issues where there might be misrepresentation. Okay. So you're right, absolutely right to highlight records. And we published a report about 18 months ago now where we did a really in-depth analysis of record issues in, we called it knowledge and information management in social housing and revealed by our casework. We also supplemented it by a call for evidence that we did, where both residents and landlords were able to respond and sort of tell their experiences. And I think we had over 1,500 responses to it, which was really high and kind of, I think, shows that what can seem like a really dry topic actually, engages people because so some thoughts. So the first is, I would say in over half of our cases, there is some failure in records. That's either a failure to have the records, the failure to provide the records to us, or a failure to use the records effectively, or the records being imperfect in some way. So, for example, this is a classic one that we see. So a resident reports 4 repairs, and the repairs log says repairs done. But what it doesn't say is which repairs and what. And so then when things haven't worked, maybe all the repairs were done, but not all of them were successful, the trail starts to go cold. And I can only imagine that repairs person or that complaint handler looking at the record going, what's it mean? And again, it's about not having the information at your fingertips. So we have got a big report on this with lots of recommendations in it. One of the things, and it's an area which we continuously come to when we highlight either in individual reports or in other work that we do. One of the things which I think is so important here, though, is back to culture. Because often the records it's the bit of the job that can, again, kind of, get neglected a bit. Because the work's been done or, and maybe its systems don't support people properly here, but it is also about culture and really valuing how records need to be kept and maintained. And I think one of the And one of the things which I think is so important for senior leaders in an organisation is to make sure that people understand that every click on that system, what the impact of that is, because it will have an impact for individuals, so that the information that landlords need to know about their residences or the home is available. It will have an impact for budgets, because if you're not recording it on the system, you're not going to prioritise the right things or put the money in the right place. You know, and it will have an impact on, you know, service improvement plans. You know, do you know actually what you need to do and where your risks are as an organisation? So culture is really, really important. We've, you know, and there's so much I think needs to be done to show that it's more than just a click on a system. It has a bigger thing. On where records are misleading or misrepresenting, I'd say the bigger issue that we see, or the more common issue that we see, is just an absence of them. There are questions there about why and whether actually the information's been made available to people in the way that it should. And that will include the Ombudsman. We do see, but it's limited, we do see some examples of where records are being distorted or misrepresented. Or more particularly, what the landlord is saying doesn't match what the records show. And where that happens, we will point it out very directly to the landlord. And I think that's, again, back to this learning. This is where, you know, senior leaders need to engage and be like, well, why are we doing that? Because if it's happened there, it could easily happen again.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks, folks.